Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to begin by acknowledging that I'm here tonight on the traditional territory of the Saanich Nation and say that I'm Hych'ka Siem with respect and gratitude. I also would like to split my time with the Honourable Leader of the Green Party of Canada, Annamie Paul, but I can't because she's not elected yet, but she will be. And I want to share with you that she comes from a strong union family. We had our caucus meeting and discussed how we all feel, the three of us who are elected and the ones who will be elected later. And what do you think about this back to work legislation? She said, never support back to work legislation. Never. So I'm honored to speak and take the time to stand clearly and firmly on the side of the longshoremen of the Port of Montreal. Aujourd'hui, c'est le jour de...
Today is a day of mourning. We remember those who died, who became injured, or who became ill because of their work. This year, with the pandemic, has been horrible. We think about frontline workers who did their work to protect our lives. And we say to them, thank you. But, Mr. Speaker, what irony that this evening, in this House of Commons, to mark this sad and serious day, we find ourselves here debating a special bill to force workers to go back to work without regard for their right. Their right to strike is a constitutional right. And now, here we are on this day of mourning, breaking their fundamental rights. So it's such a sad moment for me. I'd like to tell you a story. It's a personal story. 37 years ago, I worked as an attorney in Halifax on behalf of unions. Specifically, I worked for the Halifax Port dockworkers. And it's incredible, but at that time, the Maritime Employers Association was also the employer party. Same employer, same workers. So all kinds of memories are coming to me. I recall my experience with that group of workers that I still love to this day. But I'm sorry, I'm going to change channels.
So I'm going to tell it in English. There had been an accident at sea. The ship was tossed about in a big storm. And it came to port all right, but its cargo was badly smashed. Everywhere you looked, there was just a mess. The Maritime Association, same employers, sent the workers in to clean up the ship. The collective agreement had said that if you're in a dangerous or hazardous working situation, you had to be paid time and a half. It also said the employer had the responsibility to provide protective equipment. Oh, no, not these guys. They didn't bother providing any. Maritime Employers Association. By the way, now the Port of Halifax has a different employer association now, but this was in about 1984. And it was the Maritime Employers Association, and it was the Longshoremen of Halifax. They sent them on board the ship to clean it up. So what they had in the hold, they had some raspberry jam that was smashed. They had a lot of Mum's champagne that was smashed. And they had a commercial chemical that is known for being hygroscopic. In other words, it absorbs moisture. That's one of its commercial benefits. I think it was potassium hydroxide. My memory may be faulty on that, but I think it was potassium hydroxide. And what happened when the workers went into the hold was, because this stuff was so hygroscopic, it absorbed all the moisture around it and became very caustic and toxic in an enclosed working space where they were my friends. I loved these guys. They were sent down there to clean up the hold. And what happened was the reaction of the chemicals was that it got was really, really hot on their feet, like through their boots. It was so hot on their feet that they were, now this will of course strike all of us here tonight at this late hour as an extraordinary tragedy, but they actually just smashed what bottles of Mums weren't smashed already to pour the champagne on their feet to try to relieve the heat they were feeling. It was just awful. It was awful working conditions. They weren't given any masks. So they were having trouble breathing, and their feet were getting hot, and everything about the working conditions was appalling. They worked in these conditions until the Environment Canada people showed up. Well, actually, one person showed up who was in charge of accidents and toxic chemicals. Now, he showed up appropriately dressed in full-on hazmat, full-on moon suit. But the employers kept telling the guys to keep working in these conditions. So fast forward to, we got into an arbitration over this because the employers refused to pay what they were obliged to pay under the collective agreement. I'll never forget the lawyer from the other side. I'll spare mentioning his name because he's passed away now, and why bring abuse to him at this point? But anyway, God rest his soul. He actually laughed at the workers during our arbitration and said, what, they need protection from raspberry jam? Then I called my expert witness, Luke Tripp, the head of the Environment Canada Contaminants Program at the port at that point. And he laid it out really clearly, exactly how hazardous that was. We won that arbitration, hands down. But I haven't forgotten my seething hatred for the Maritime Employers Association, I'm sorry to say. Now, it's many years later. They're all different people. They've probably all changed their tune. But in this conflict, I have no doubt where my heart lies. I cannot believe that we're in this situation where workers are being treated like this in 2021, that they would be provoked into this situation with so much arbitrary unilateral actions by the employers. It's really very, very distressing to imagine that we are passing legislation to force the wronged party back to work and not standing up with the union. Nous, comme Verts, nous sommes solidaires.
We feel solidarity with the Dockworkers Union, the Syndicat des Débardeurs, and I want to say it out loud. Solidarity. Solidarity. The Débardeurs des Port de Montréal, the Port of Montreal dockworkers are victims of a strategy. The employers are not showing good faith. All of the trials the dockworkers have been through, all the stories we heard, it's terrible to me that we now have a bill, a special bill under closure to force workers to go back to work without protecting their constitutional right to strike.
I'm very glad that in a life of lots of different kinds of jobs, I had the chance to work in union side labor law. But I am overwhelmed by how many times, and as the same point was made by the honorable member for Rosemont-le-Petit-Patrie, those of us elected in 2011, just actually coming up to my 10th anniversary this Sunday, one of the first things we had was back to work legislation for CUPE workers, Canada Post workers, was awful. I mean, I said CUPE, I'm sorry, CUP W in that instance. The CUP W workers being forced back to work with we had and Jack Layton led us in a 3 days, I think it was, of filibuster to try to stop that from happening. And we were all the time hoping that there were some negotiations happening. But that should be a rare instance. It's becoming all too common. I do agree with my friend from Nanaimo Ladysmith that it threatens to become not just a pattern, but normal. It threatens to become a way of fundamentally undermining the rights of collective agreements and of ignoring the fact that we can get to negotiated solutions. I know it's tough, and I have nothing but regard and affection for my friend, the Minister of Labor, but this is a terrible mistake. It's a terrible mistake. We should not be doing this because the employer clearly knew that they could provoke and make unilateral decisions that violated the collective agreement that they were still honoring. I mean, it's been a number of years without a collective agreement, but both sides were honoring it enough. Despite the strike that they had last year, they've been working hard to keep the goods moving. And that's a key point. The union has been working hard to keep goods being delivered. They've been trying. And we know that on March 17th, when the employer tried to say that the union was not bargaining in good faith, the mediator couldn't say that. They said that there just was premature to make that conclusion. So who wasn't acting in good faith here? The same guys who sent the Halifax longshoremen into a toxic hold of the ship to clean up the mess, who laughed at them. So you see, I haven't quite gotten over it. This is not a moment to force the longshoremen back to work. This is a moment to have someone pick up the phone and say to the Maritime Employers Union, Maritime Employers Association, this is not acceptable. You guys provoked this. We're not going to back you up here. We're going to make sure that we move heaven and earth to move those goods to other ports, that we're going to find workarounds. We're not a country that's known for being landlocked. We're known for having ports, and not any of them are as, you know, it's not going to be easy if we let the strike go. It wouldn't be easy to find a good berth for every ship that's heading into that port, but we have many more options than they did in the Suez Canal. We've got ports in Quebec, ports in Halifax, ports in St. John. We got ports on our East Coast, ports on our West Coast. Surely to God, there was a better solution than this. So I lament it deeply. I wish from my heart of hearts that we had not come to this place where we are tonight in, and I know, of course, in Ottawa, it's well after midnight. Here in British Columbia, it is getting on in time, but this should not have happened on April 28th. This deepens the offense, deepens the damage, deepens what it means to workers across this country, because I agree entirely with the union's press release that this action in back to work legislation strikes at the heart of collective bargaining, hurts every worker across this country. And make no mistake about it, a country that doesn't have a strong trade union movement is a country that lacks in social justice, that loses ground on the very things that we take for granted, like children don't go to work in factories, like there's such a thing as time off, that there's such a thing as reasonable work-life balance, some of the conditions that the longshoremen were working for so hard. So enfin, pour moi, je veux dire seulement.
All I want to say is that I infinitely regret the special legislation that will pass under closure this evening. It's a bad decision by our government. It goes against workers' rights, it goes against unions' rights, and it goes against the workers of the Port of Montreal. I want to tell all the Montreal longshoremen that I am terribly sorry. Please forgive us for being unable to prevent this decision and block it by our government. Thank you very much.
For Cumberland, Colchester.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member for her impassioned speech. I love to hear her stories about her life and history in all kinds of aspects, and thank you for sharing that one. I have to say, as a member of a former NDP government in Nova Scotia, in July 5th of 2013, the NDP government actually introduced back to work legislation for the paramedics. And they cited the fact that there was no compromise, and that it was about health and safety of Nova Scotians. And in fact, we did introduce that legislation. what do you believe about voting for your conscience and being able to speak up on the subjects that you may not agree with your own government about? Thank you.
The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I just say out loud how much I love the honourable member for Cumberland Colchester, her fine work against environmental racism and all the things she stands for.
Thank you.
For the reminder that the NDP in power are always very different from the NDP in opposition. I'm sorry, I speak as a British Columbian who's had too many promises broken from Premier John Horgan. So I would say that it's always best to speak your mind. It's always best to vote the way you want to vote. And I'm blessed to be in a party that has, as a matter of our policy as passed by our members, that no whipped votes are allowed. I love her. There you go. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Mission Matsqui Fraser Canyon.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member from Saanich Gulf Islands. She just mentioned our beautiful British Columbia, so I'd like to get her comments on the community benefit agreements, which is a provincial matter, but given that we just kind of went in that direction, I don't think it's completely irrelevant. In British Columbia, the Christian Labour Association has been excluded by the New Democratic Party, Premier John Horgan, from bidding on major infrastructure projects because they're not part of the unions that the NDP government believe is actually a union, even though the Christian Labour Association members believe they're a union. What would the Green Party say about the exclusion of the Christian Labour Association of Canada, CLAC, which represents thousands and thousands of workers in BC, from having their rights protected as workers and their ability to bid on government projects? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Before I go to the honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands, this subject did come up before. I think it should be pointed out. I'm having a hard time making the links to relevance in respect to the topic. I see that it's loosely connected in terms of the labour movement and so on, but it is, I think, by its definition, very much a British Columbia issue. I will let the honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands take a run at it in her response, but I do want to just caution honourable members to keep their questions and comments relevant to the subject at hand. The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll ask the leader of the Green Party of British Columbia, Sonia, first now to get back to my friend from Mission Matsqui Fraser Canyon and move on to discussing the Port of Montreal now.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Laval, Laurentides Laval. I'd just like to point out that it's now 1:19 here in Quebec. This is quite the job we're doing. And there's some action that's unacceptable. Your words touched me. And I'd also like to say that how shameful this is. What will be the view of Quebecers and all citizens of Canada following the vote that we will have in a few minutes, given this government's unresponsible behavior? Thank you to my Bloc Québec colleague. I am completely in agreement with her. This is shameful. This is the only word that can be used for the events of tonight. I hope I've been saying the word correctly in French, but it's shameful.
That's the honourable member for Churchill, Kiwatinuk, Aski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud to say that I stand with our party in fighting this back to work legislation, and many of the points raised by the member resonated with me. I'm wondering if she could speak to the implications of this attack on workers, not just on the Port of Workers in Montreal, but on all workers across Canada.
The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Well, of course, if all workers across Canada had access to being members of trade unions, I think we'd see more strength in our social justice movements. The role of unions, I think we can all say, through the era of neoliberalism have been weakened. Any blow against the rights of unionized workers is a blow to the heart of what makes us a great country. And there's just no question about it. So I think that every single time that we bring in back to work legislation, it's inevitably, no matter how much people in the government want to say that this is not taking sides, it clearly is, and it's taking the wrong side.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Nanaimo, Ladysmith.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my honourable colleague from Saanich Gulf Islands for her very heartfelt speech and for doing the research to take the evening for us. These are essential workers. These are people that we celebrate during the pandemic that are getting the supplies into the country, and they've been clearly mistreated. And the evidence looks like the employers provoked this situation. And I'm just wondering if you've seen any evidence that the employers knew that they could take this to the boiling point and would be able to count on the Liberal government for back to work legislation.
The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Yeah, thank you to my honourable friend from Nanaimo, Ladysmith, my dear friend. Honestly, I don't know that we have evidence, but circumstantially, how else can you read the situation? The employer systematically provoked the situation and needlessly. And I know that many of the Liberal and Conservative speakers have made much of the fact that they've been going so long without coming to a successful negotiation and a successful conclusion. But, and I've pointed out a few times in this place, it's not uncommon to go a long time without a contract while you're negotiating, and yet you keep working. And the fact that in this place, in our House of Commons, as employers, and we are employers, our protective service workers went 4 years without a contract, and they were taking, a job action in wearing those badges that, or wearing a ball cap, or in other ways breaking the code of how they were to dress. That was the only action they could take. Imagine if that wasn't used against them, that it took 4 years to negotiate it. It was used. I think the RCMP took way too long to treat our workers fairly within the House of Commons. The fact that they've been talking for 2 years is no justification whatsoever for deciding that it couldn't be solved, that it could never be resolved, that it couldn't find a negotiated solution. And I just...
Nous allons essayer juste notre dernier.
The last question, please. Probably the last question. The Honourable Member for Rosemont-La Petite Patrie. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for this speech with regard to solidarity. But what about federal labor relations? Should we not have a law that prevents the use of strike breakers, as well as a law to prevent back-to-work legislation? The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks to my colleague from Rosemont-La Petite Patrie. For the last time tonight, I'm going to say I fully agree. We must protect the rights of workers. There can be no balance in the future unless workers' rights are protected against employers, exactly as he says.